Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Bhante Suddhāso and we'll be looking at another discourse of the Buddha. This one's from the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 9, Sammādiṭṭhisutta. So I'll start with homage to the Buddha, then I'll read through the discourse and give some explanations, and then I'll take questions at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sammasambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So as mentioned, this is the Sammādiṭṭhisutta, discourse on right view. So this is one of the great classics from the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 9. So I'll be, there's actually a translation that I had made of this many years ago on Sutta Central, and also Bhante Sujato's. I think I will read through Bhante Sujato's as the main text, but I might make some comments on the Pali as we go through. So I'll start with the discourse. So the discourse begins. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove in Ātapindika's monastery. There, Sāriputta addressed the monks. So this is interesting, first off, in that this is one of the discourses which was not given by the Buddha himself, but instead was given by one of the Buddha's main disciples. So the vast majority of the recorded discourses in the Pali Canon are attributed to the Buddha. The next largest percentage is attributed to Venerable Sāriputta. And then there's a handful of others attributed to other bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. So the ones from Venerable Sāriputta, again, tend to have a particular analytical flavor, which is notable, has a notable characteristic. So it's a distinct style, which we find in many of the Buddhist discourses as well. So the discourse begins. So there Sāriputta addressed the monks. Venerable monks. Venerable sir, they replied. And Sāriputta said this. Venerables, let me see. Actually, I'm going to read here from the translation I made years ago. So Sāriputta says, Venerables, it is said, right view, right view. So that's Sammādiṭṭhi, Sammādiṭṭhi. He says, Venerables, how does a disciple of the noble ones have right view? How is his view upright? How is he possessed of certainty and confidence in the Dhamma? How is he one who has arrived at this true Dhamma? So in Pali, he's saying, and so how is a disciple of the noble ones? How do they have Sammādiṭṭhi, right view? How is their view ujju, which means upright or direct or straightforward? But normally the word ujju has the sense of morally upright. So it has the sense of straight in the sense of not being crooked or flawed or out of shape, but it also has the sense of morally upright. And then one who has unshakable certainty and confidence in the Dhamma. One who has arrived at the true Dhamma. So this means someone who is has absolute faith in the validity of the Dhamma. And especially this thing about having unshakable faith in the Dhamma and having arrived at the true Dhamma. This means someone who has attained at least stream entry. So this comes up a few places in the suttas. In a few places in the suttas, it says that the only people who genuinely have right view are people who are at least stream enterers. So the rest of us can have some intellectual concept of the Buddha's teachings, but we're still seeing the world in a distorted way. So our viewpoint from which we see the world, our worldview is distorted, it's inaccurate. And so what distinguishes a stream enterer is that a stream enterer has finally started to see the world correctly. He's finally started to see the world accurately. So one of the terms for a stream enterer that we find in the suttas is called Decrepitude. So one who has attained the view, one who has attained the perspective, one who has attained right view. So The monks then reply, they say, Venerable, we would travel a long way to learn the meaning of the statement in the presence of Venerable Sāriputta. May Venerable Sāriputta himself please clarify the meaning of this. The monks will listen and remember it. This also is something which comes up often in the suttas, is whoever is giving the Dhamma talk will ask a question. And sometimes the audience will reply, and sometimes they will just say, we would rather you tell us the answer. So Venerable Sāriputta says, well then, Venerables, listen and apply your mind well, I will speak. And Sāriputta says, a disciple of the Noble Ones understands the unwholesome and its root, and they understand the wholesome and its root. To this extent, they are called a disciple of the Noble Ones who has right view, whose view is upright, who has experiential confidence or certainty and confidence in the teaching, and who has arrived at the true Dhamma. So the basic explanation he's giving here for right view is knowing what is unwholesome and what is wholesome, and knowing what is the basis for the wholesome and the basis for the unwholesome. So the Pali word here is kusala. So kusala in the suttas most commonly has a distinctly moral connotation. So something is kusala if it is beneficial, if it is helpful. And it's the ideal of kusala is something that is beneficial to attaining awakening, something that is supportive to making progress on the path to awakening. And the opposite is akusala, so something that is unwholesome, so things which are harmful, which are not beneficial, but which are rather bring unpleasant results or obstructive results. And of course, this is most extreme in things which obstruct our path to awakening. So Sāriputta continues. He says, what is unwholesome and what is its roots? And what is wholesome and what is its root? And he says, killing living beings, stealing and sexual misconduct, speech that is false, divisive, harsh, or useless, and covetousness, ill will, and wrong view. These are called unwholesome. So this list he gives here is sometimes called the 10 unwholesome courses of action. So 3 of body, 4 of speech, and 3 of mind. So this overlaps a bit with the 5 precepts as well as with the Noble Eightfold Path. So unwholesome conduct then is killing living beings, stealing things, engaging in sexual misconduct. Unwholesome speech is deliberate lies, divisive speech, abusive speech, and useless speech. And then mental misconduct is cultivating desire, aversion, and wrong view. And Sāriputta says, what is the root of the unwholesome? And he says, greed, hatred, and delusion. So this is pretty clear. So when the mind is overcome with greed, hatred, and delusion, then that leads us to doing inappropriate things like killing and stealing and using abusive speech and useless speech and so on. Then he says, what is the wholesome? So the wholesome is refraining from killing, refraining from stealing and sexual misconduct, refraining from speech that's false, divisive, harsh, or useless, and cultivating contentment, goodwill, and right view. So this is the Bhante Sujato translation. Anibija actually literally just means non-covetousness. Abhyapada means non-aversion. And then Sammādiṭṭhi means right view. So cultivating non-covetousness, non-aversion, and cultivating right view. So this is the wholesome. And what is the root of the wholesome? And the root of the wholesome is non-hate, non-greed, non-hate, and non-delusion. So alobha, absence of greed, adosa, absence of aversion, and amoha, absence of delusion. So when the mind is not full of greed, hatred, and delusion, when the mind is free of greed, hatred, and delusion, then naturally one will not kill anything, one will not steal, one will not misuse sexuality, one will not speak falsely, divisively, harshly, or uselessly, and one will not cultivate covetousness, aversion, and wrong view. So Sāriputta says, a disciple of the Noble Ones understands in this way the unwholesome and its root, and the wholesome in its root. They have completely given up the underlying tendency to greed, the underlying tendency to aversion, and the underlying tendency to the view and concept I am. They've given up ignorance and given rise to knowledge and make an end of suffering in this very life. So the description Sāriputta is just given here is actually the description of an arhat. So someone who has completely eliminated greed and hate from the mind, and has also completely eliminated the concept of self-existence, the concept of self-identity. So such a person is fully awakened, because the elimination of greed and hatred is something that occurs with to the large degree with the third stage of awakening. But the elimination of the concept of self-existence is something that's only eliminated with full awakening, with arhatship. And Sāriputta says, when they've done this, they are defined as a disciple of the noble ones who has right view, whose view is upright, who has certainty and confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at the true Dhamma. So here Sāriputta is describing a person with right view as being an arhat. Which, again, is actually technically true. So only a fully awakened being actually has perfect right view. Even a stream enterer has only the initial stages of right view. So the monks reply, "Sadhu," and then they ask another question. They say, might there be another way to describe right view? And Sāriputta says there could be. And Sāriputta says, a disciple of the noble ones understands nutriment, its origin, its cessation, and the practice that leads to its cessation. So the Pali word here that is commonly translated as nutriment is ahara, which more literally means intake. So it's from the verb harati, which means to take. So ahara means intake. So the Sāriputta is about to talk about the 4 kinds of intake. So I'll talk about that when he says here. He says, what is intake? What is its origin, its cessation, and the practice that leads to a cessation? He says there are these 4 kinds of intake that maintain sentient beings that have been born and help those that are about to be born. So let's see, those about to be born. Technically, it's sambhavesi, which literally means seeking a state of existence. So those that are about to be born is a little bit of a loose translation here. So literally it means those who have come to be and those who are seeking a state of existence. So this is one of the many places in the suttas that seem to refer to an intermediate state of being between 2 lives. So this idea that after someone passes away, there can be an intermediate period where they've not yet begun a new life, but they're in between states. And in that in-between state, they're called sambhavesi, which means one who is seeking a state of being. So he says, there are these 4 intakes. What for? Solid food, whether substantial or refined. Sense contact as the second. Mental volition as the third. And consciousness as the 4th. So the 4 kinds of intake. So one is physical and the other 3 are mental. So these are things that we intake, that we consume, and which then build up the basis of our body and mind. So food is something that we consume physically that then builds up our physical body, becomes the substructure of our physical body. Whereas sensory contact, volition, and consciousness are things that we intake mentally, and that then form the substructure of our mind. So what kind of sensory input we consume then shapes our subconscious mind. What kind of intentions we produce, what kind of attitudes and ideas and choices we make also then starts to structure the subconscious layer of the mind. And consciousness is, again, it's talking about our sensory field. So as we move through the world, our sensory field is constantly picking up information, which then also shapes our subconscious mind, feeds our subconscious mind. And so this then means that we need to be extremely careful about what we intake, what we consume. So if we consume a lot of junk food, then our body becomes weak and frail and sickly. If we consume a lot of poisons, then again, our body can become quite damaged, quite sick. And similarly, if we consume healthy food and good medicines, then our body becomes healthy and strong. And it's the same with our mind. If we're constantly consuming harmful or toxic mental objects, then our mind starts to also become a bit sickly, damaged and poisoned. Whereas if we're constantly directing our mind towards healthy input, then our mind will become correspondingly healthy. So if we're spending our time watching violent movies and reading romance novels and gossiping with our friends, well, then that's constantly filling the mind with toxic mental food. It's constantly filling the mind with mental junk food and poison, which then leads to a sickly and damaged mind, which then makes it much more difficult to cultivate the path to awakening. Whereas if we're constantly filling the mind with Dhamma input, so reading the suttas, discussing the suttas, cultivating a wholesome input, wholesome sensory input, then that will generate a correspondingly healthy and wholesome mind, which will then be a much better basis for attaining awakening. And Sāriputta says, intake originates from craving. Intake ceases when craving ceases. The practice that leads to the cessation of intake is simply this Noble Eightfold Path. That is, right view, right attitude, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. So this is an interesting statement. So intake arises from craving. So when we are desires, when the mind is full of desire, then it seeks out something to consume. So that desire can express itself physically. So again, consuming food and drink, or it can express itself mentally in seeking out sensory input or concepts or ideas to consume into the mind to feed our desire. And when craving ceases, then the intake process ceases. So when we no longer have desire for sensory input or for sensuality, then we no longer seek it out. It's no longer relevant to us. And then that naturally leads to the mind settling into a deep state of contentment and peace. And so Sāriputta here is pointing to the fact that if we want to work on eliminating our craving so that this intake process can come to an end, then the way to do that is through practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. So Sāriputta says, a disciple of the Noble Ones understands in this way intake, its origin, its cessation, and the practice that leads to its cessation. They have completely given up the underlying tendencies to greed, aversion, and the view and concept of self-existence. They've given up ignorance and given rise to knowledge and made an end of suffering in this very life. So again, he's defining he's defining a person with right view as someone who has attained full awakening. And then the monks ask Sāriputta to describe right view in another way. And Sāriputta says, a disciple of the Noble Ones understands dukkha, its origin, its cessation, and the practice that leads to its cessation. So a much more straightforward answer. So what is right view? Well, right view is knowing the Four Noble Truths. It's knowing the discontent and dissatisfaction that pervades the mind, knowing what causes it, knowing its ending, and knowing how to practice in a way that leads to its ending. So Sāriputta says, what is dukkha? He says, birth is dukkha, decay is dukkha, death is dukkha, sorrow, lamentation, pain, depression, and distress are dukkha. Association with the disliked is dukkha. Separation from the liked is dukkha. Not getting what you want is dukkha. in brief, the 5 components of being, when affected by grasping, are dukkha. He says this is dukkha. So I think it's pretty clear what dukkha is. Dukkha is all of this uncomfortable, unpleasant, unsatisfying experiences that happen to us as we go through our life as unawakened beings. All of this is unsatisfying. So in this context, dukkha is, rather than translated as suffering, dukkha is better translated as unsatisfying. All the things that we experience in life are unsatisfying. They're displeasing. They don't bring us true happiness or contentment. They're just a series of disappointing experiences. So Sāriputta says, this is called dukkha. And what is the origin of dukkha? It is the craving that leads to future lives, is mixed with relishing and greed, taking pleasure wherever it finds it. That is, craving for sensuality, craving for existence, and craving to end existence. This is called the origin of dukkha. So again, the origin of dukkha is craving. And here Sāriputta points out that craving is something that leads to renewed existence. So pono bhavika leads to rebirth, to taking on a new existence. It's mixed up with delight and passion. So nandi raga sahagata, it's mixed up with delight and passion. Which again is interesting because those who are not Dhamma practitioners often think that delighting in something and being passionate for something is part of what makes life great. So find something you're passionate about and commit to it. Find something that delights you and focus your life around it. These are things which ordinary people say. But actually the Buddhist view is that fueling our delight in passion is just something that keeps us even more entrenched in samsara. So if you're really passionate about something, well, that's dangerous. Unless it's the Dhamma, then that's good. But if you're really passionate about a worldly thing, that's dangerous, because it will just get you even more enmeshed in the world, even more trapped in samsara. And so the Buddha said there's 3 kinds of craving. So craving for sensuality, kama tanha. So that's craving for any kind of sensory experience, including mental objects. Craving for bhava. So bhava is existence or states of being. So wanting to be something or wanting to be anything at all. And then vibhava tanha is the craving to separate from a state of being. So this might be specific, like wanting to avoid a specific kind of being. Like, I really don't want to be American. I wish I was not American. Or I really wish I wasn't part of this particular family or in this particular circumstance. That's vibhava tanha, the desire to avoid a specific state of existence. Or it can be generalized, like wanting to not exist at all. So wanting to blink out of existence. Some people have this desire, the desire to stop existing. So these 3 kinds of 3 kinds of craving all keep us constantly cycling through the round of rebirth. It's interesting that the desire to stop existing is something that in fact leads to ongoing existence. It's pono bhavika. So vibhava tanha, the desire to avoid bhava, is pono bhavika. It leads to more bhava. So wanting to stop existing just means that you will continue cycling through existence. So then Sāriputta says, what is the cessation of dukkha? And he says, it is the cessation through dispassion of that same craving, with nothing left over. Giving it up, letting go of it, releasing it, and not clinging to it. So here, Sāriputta is pointing to the practice of, first off, viraga, dispassion, chaga, which means letting go, patinissaga, relinquishment, mutti, release, and analaya means non-clinging or non-adherence. So how do we let go of, how do we get rid of craving? Through cultivating dispassion, through letting go, through practicing relinquishment, releasing, and non-adherence. And this is something that we can start with through physical things. So a great practice actually is to go through all your possessions and get rid of everything that's not essential. Give it away, or throw it away, or recycle it, or give it to charity, or whatever. But just go through your stuff and get rid of as much as you can. And whenever you find something where you're like, no, I really want to keep this one, look at that state of mind. Look at that state of mind which is fixated and attached on something inessential. Look at the dukkha that arises from that. When you think about losing your precious thing, whatever it is, look at the suffering that arises from that. Recognizing that the suffering is only there because of your attachment to the object, which is itself non-essential. Whereas when we relinquish that, when we give it away, when we get rid of it, notice how the mind relaxes. Doesn't need to think about it anymore. Doesn't need to worry about it. When it's gone, and you can get on with your life. And he says, what is the practice that leads to the cessation of dukkha? It is just this noble eightfold path. And he lists the eightfold path again. And again, Sāriputta says that a disciple of the noble ones who understands in this way has given up the tendency towards greed, aversion, and the belief of self-existence, and made an end of suffering in this very life. So the same statement he's been saying for the previous sections. So again, he's here saying that one who fully understands the Four Noble Truths is one who has right view, and also necessarily one who has attained full awakening. And of course, the monks keep going. They're like, can you tell us another way to describe right view? So this is part of what I love about the sutta. It's just, you keep going and it's just like, is there another way? And Sāriputta's like, there's another way. And he gives another way. It's kind of like, please, sir, can we have some more? And he's like, yes, how about 5 more? So Sāriputta then says, a disciple of the noble ones understands decrepitude and death. So decay and death, their origin, their cessation, and the practice that leads to their cessation. So this is jara and marana. So jara is commonly translated somewhat blandly as old age. But in the suttas, the term jara much more clearly means decay. It's not just about being old, but rather it's about decay, the loss of one's faculties, the reduction of one's abilities, the reduction of one's strength and health, which is clear here. So Sāriputta then says, what is decay and death? And the first one, he says, it is the decay, decrepitude, broken teeth, gray hair, wrinkled skin, diminished vitality, and failing faculties of sentient beings in the various categories of sentient beings. This is called decay, so jara. So again, it's quite clear. It's not just talking about how many years you have by your name, but rather it's talking about the loss of one's physical and mental capacities as one gets older. So it's talking about the process of decrepitude and decay. Then he says, what is death? What is dying? So this is marana. What is dying? He says, the passing away, perishing, disintegration, demise, mortality, death, decease, separation, breaking up of the components of being, laying down the body, separation from, let's see this in Pali. Machumarana kalang kiriya literally means completion of one's time. Kandanang bedo means the separation from the khandas, so becoming separated from one's current body and mind. Kalivarasa laying down the corpse. Jivatindriya supachedos, that means cutting off the life faculty. He says this is called death. So these are all just different idioms that were apparently used at the time. So like these days we say like, oh, he passed away, or he's gone to the next life. So we use these kinds of idioms, or people say like, oh, we put our cat to sleep. It's like, no, you didn't put them to sleep, you killed them. Let's be realistic here. It's like, oh, so-and-so passed away. Yeah, they're dead. Let's just be honest here. So here he's using these different idioms and euphemisms just to be really clear what we're talking about. We're talking about the coming to the end of one physical life and then moving on to the next one. So it says, this is called death. So this is decay and death. And he says, decay and death originate from birth. Decay and death cease when birth ceases. The practice that leads to the cessation of decay and death is simply this Noble Eightfold Path. And he goes through the Eightfold Path again. And from this point onward, Sāriputta starts going through dependent origination, which if I talk about dependent origination in depth, we're going to be here all night. So I'm just going to go through each section briefly. So again, he's saying, so what's the basis of decay and death? Well, it arises from birth. When there is birth, there is decay and death. So this is quite clear. So if you're never born, then you can't experience decay and death. If you are born, then you will inevitably experience decay and death. It comes together. It's a package deal. Birth comes together with decay and death. So buy one, get two free. It's a really bad deal. But we've all taken this deal over and over again. And so they ask, can you give another explanation? And Sāriputta then says, a disciple of the Noble Ones understands birth, its origin, cessation, and the practice that leads to its cessation. And what is birth? And he says, the birth, inception, conception, transmigration, manifestation of the components of being, acquisition of the sense fields of the various beings and the various categories of beings. This is called birth. And birth originates from existence. Birth ceases when existence ceases. So this is bhava. So birth ceases when bhava ceases. And the practice that leads to the cessation of birth is this Noble Eightfold Path. And then next he goes into talking about bhava. So what is bhava? He says there are these three kinds of bhava. So the first one is existence in the sensual realm. So sensual existence, that's kama bhava. Then there's rupa bhava, so form existence, and arupa bhava, existence without form. So these are three very broad ways of categorizing states of being. So kama bhava are the sensual states of being, sensual forms of existence, which includes all the lower realms, the hell realms, the ghost realms, the animal realms. They're all characterized by sensual craving. But the lower realms are characterized by being overcome by pain and misery. So craving for sensuality that is unfulfilled in the case of the ghost realms, or which is fulfilled only with pain and horror in the case of the lower realms. And the sensual realm also includes the human realm, which is usually considered to be a balanced mixture of pleasure and pain. And it also includes the lower deva realms, the lower heaven realms, which are much more pleasant than the human realm, but still are unsatisfying and are still fixated on sensuality. Then the rupa bhava, states of existence which are connected with form. This is referring to the Brahma devas, so the devas which are a much more refined kind of form, a much more refined and subtle existence, but which still have some connection with the physical world. So there's a number of suttas where the Buddha interacts with Brahma devas, interacts with beings in these refined, subtle material planes. But then the third one is the immaterial planes, the non-corporeal states of being in which there is no connection with the physical world whatsoever. So these are mind-only devas, devas that exist only as a disembodied mind. And those devas have no interaction with the physical world and no interaction with beings who are outside of their own limited domain. So these three states of existence then, these are three ways that a being can exist. They can exist in a sensual form, as most of us do, or they can exist in a very subtle, refined form, as the Brahma devas, or they can exist only as a disembodied mind. as the incorporeal devas do. So these three kinds of existence. So once one is established in some form of existence, then one is born into that. One is born into a body and mind within that category of existence. So this then is why existence is the basis for birth. So what is the basis for existence? And he says it arises from grasping, upadana. So the mind that is reaching out to grab something. And when one life has ended, then if the mind still has the tendency towards grasping, it will reach out to grab another state of being. It'll reach out to latch on to another state of existence, which then leads to rebirth and continuation in the cycle of birth and death. So then he says, what is grasping? There are these four kinds of grasping. Grasping at sensuality, grasping at views, grasping at habitual practices, and grasping at the doctrine of self, or grasping at self-belief. So in Pali, this is kamupadana, so kama upadana, so kama means sensuality, so grasping at sensuality. Again, what leads to rebirth? Well, a common thing that leads to rebirth is as someone's getting towards the end of their death, they're thinking about all the delightful sensual experiences they've had in this life, or the sensual experiences they haven't had but wish they had. Like you're getting close to death and you get out your bucket list and you're like, yeah, I haven't done that one yet. I haven't done that one yet. I really wish I had done those things during this life. And then you die and the mind immediately reaches out to try to grab those experiences. So that grasping at sensuality then will pull you into another rebirth, into another state of being. So that's the most coarse and obvious form of grasping. It's grasping at sensory experiences. Ditthupadana is grasping at views and opinions. So this is very common among intellectual types, philosophers, people who like to fixate on ideas and cling tightly to ideas and relish ideas and opinions. So the mind which is constantly fixating and latching on to ideas and opinions. And again, this then leads to one constantly trying to reach out and grab onto and hold on to mental objects. So abstract mental objects connected with views and opinions. And then grasping at, in Pali this is sila bhattupadana, grasping at sila and vata. So the word sila, depending on its context, it can mean morality or it can mean precepts, but often the word sila actually means habits. So habitual behaviors. And vata means practices, observances, vows, duties. So then sila and vata together are habitual behaviors and practices. So grasping at habitual behaviors and practices, it's if you have a particular way of doing things and you get fixated on it must be this way. Like I always wake up at 5 o'clock and drink green tea. It's like, well, okay, there's nothing wrong with waking up at 5 and there's nothing wrong with drinking green tea. But if you think it must be this way, I need it to be this way, then that's sila bhattupadana. That's clinging to a habitual practice, clinging to a certain way of doing things. And this becomes really clear in monastic environments. Someone's trained in one monastery, and in that monastery, things are done in a particular way. The rules and protocols are in a particular way, the schedule's in a particular way, the ceremonies are done in a particular way. Then they go to another monastery, and everything's different. The rules are a bit different, the schedule's a bit different, the ceremonies are done differently, the robes are worn differently, and it's like everything is wrong in this place. But actually, there's nothing wrong in either place. What's wrong is in your own mind. If you fixate on the way things are done in one place, then you will suffer. You'll suffer whenever things are done differently from that, but even while things are done the way you want them to be, you'll still be suffering. Because the mind, on some level, we know the frailty of wishing for things to only be in one particular way. We know that the nature of all things is to change. So as long as we're clinging tightly to things being done in a particular way, then our happiness is fragile, it's unstable. So the mind is always going to be in a state of discomfort and unease. And again, when one life is coming to an end, then if the mind is already been trained to fixate on habitual procedures and practices, then it will just keep trying to latch on to that. It will keep looking for some apparent stability to hold on to, which again will pull the mind into another state of existence, into another rebirth. And of course, the most important one is the fourth one, attavadupadana. So atta is self, and vada means a doctrine or a concept. So grasping at the concept of self, grasping at a belief in self. So as long as we believe that we have some kind of true self or true soul which persists, well, when one life comes to an end, then we'll be believing that we have some true self or true soul which needs to pass on to another state of being. So naturally, we'll start grasping at another state of being. Our belief in our own existence will then pull us into another state of existence. Self-fulfilling prophecy. And Sāriputta says, grasping originates from craving, from tanha. And what is craving? He says there are 6 classes of craving. Craving for sights, sounds, smells, tastes, touches, and mental objects. So 6 kinds of craving. And it's craving for the 6 kinds of sensory experiences, the 5 physical and the 1 mental. 6 categories of sensory experience. And craving originates from feeling, from Vedana. And what is Vedana? So normally we define Vedana as 3. So pleasant Vedana, painful Vedana, and neutral Vedana. So 3 kinds of feeling. Here, Sāriputta instead defines it as related to the 6 senses. So Vedana arising through visual contact, auditory contact, so eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, the 6 kinds of sensory contact. So each one produces a corresponding feeling. And then if we are craving a pleasant one, then that's craving. If we're trying to avoid or we're aversive towards a painful one, well, that's still a form of craving. And if we're wishing to ignore a neutral feeling, well, again, that's still a form of craving. Craving to ignore. So then any kind of sensation or feeling that comes through the 6 senses, if we're reacting to it with desire, aversion, or apathy, then that will fuel our craving. That will fuel this constant motion of desire, which then keeps us locked into the round of rebirth. And he says feeling originates from sense contact. What is sense contact? And of course, it's sense contact through eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Sense contact originates from the 6 sense fields, which are, of course, the sense fields of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. The 6 sense fields originate from mind and body. This is nama and rupa. Nama means mind, and rupa means body. So when we have a mind and body, then that necessarily brings with it the 6 sense fields, which then leads to sensory contact. And when we have desire in relationship to sensory contact, then that again creates the whole cycle that leads to rebirth. And what's the origin of mind and body? Well, first off, he says, what is mind and body? So he says feeling, perception, volition, contact, and mental application. This is called mind. And the 4 primary elements and the physical form derived from the 4 primary elements, this is called body. So again, mind, he's defining here in terms of the mental characteristics of feeling, perception, volition, contact, and mental application. Or attention is another way that's translated, manasikara. And then body is the experience of the physical elements, the physical world. So this is mind and body. He says mind and body originate from consciousness. So vijnana. And what is consciousness? And here Sāriputta defines consciousness as sensory consciousness. So consciousness of eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And this is a bit peculiar because this is putting awareness of the six sense fields as prior to the arising of body and mind, which is itself prior to the arising of the six sense fields. So this appears to be a case where most likely the text was rewritten a little bit after the fact, because otherwise we wind up with something that's out of sequence here. So consciousness, he then says, arises from sankhara. Sankhara is one of these challenging words to clearly define, to translate directly into English. So sankhara can mean mental activities, mental processes, which can be either intentional, in the sense of something that we're deliberately doing with the mind, mental activities we're currently engaging in, or it can be residual. So echoes in the mind of whatever we've done in the past that's still left an ongoing imprint or ongoing process in the mind. So either one of those would be sankhara. So sankhara both has the active sense of something we're currently doing, and also the passive sense of something that has already been done, that's already been created. So the word sankhara most literally means construct. So a sankhara is, in this case, a mental construct, something that's been constructed by the mind. But it also has the sense of something the mind is currently constructing, something it's currently doing. So what does consciousness arise from? Consciousness arises from mental constructs, mental activities. So when the mind is engaging in this construction process, then that then creates the sense of consciousness, the sense of awareness. And then that sense of awareness starts to investigate the experience. It's like, well, aware of what? What is it that's aware of what? And it's aware of this body and mind. And through this body and mind, then it becomes aware of the six senses. Through the six senses, it becomes aware of sense contact and feelings, and then craving towards different feelings starts to arise. So this is the sequence that's being laid out here. And what is the origin of sankharas? Well, first off, what are sankharas? He says there are three. There are kaya sankhara, which means body or physical sankhara, bodily activities, bodily processes. Vachi sankhara is verbal activities, verbal processes. And chitta sankhara, which is mental constructs, mental activities. So these three kinds of sankhara: physical, verbal, and mental. So these three categories of activities or processes. And what does that arise from? He says it arises from ignorance. So from ignorance arises physical, verbal, and mental activities, which then leads to the whole process of formulating a sense of identity built around body and mind, then leading into the generation of craving and grasping based upon the six senses, which then leads into the basis for rebirth. And so then Sāriputta says, what is ignorance? He says ignorance is not knowing dukkha, not knowing the origin of dukkha, not knowing the cessation of dukkha, and not knowing the practice that leads to the cessation of dukkha. So this is a very basic definition of ignorance. What is ignorance? Avidya. It is ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. And so ignorance of the Four Noble Truths, again, it's something deeper than just not knowing about it. It means we're not actually seeing our experience in this way. So we might have heard the Four Noble Truths and be like, oh yeah, I know the whole like dukkha, and dukkha is caused by craving and whatever. And then nonetheless, we see something we like and we start craving it and we start wanting it and we start thinking about how great it would be to get it. So although we might have heard about the Four Noble Truths, we clearly still don't get it. If we really understood the Four Noble Truths, then we would be fully enlightened. So we might have a concept of the Four Noble Truths, but our mind is not operating in accordance with them. Maybe a fraction of our mind is starting to operate in accordance with the Four Noble Truths, but most of our mind is not. So this then is the training process in Buddhist practice. It's training the whole mind to operate in accordance with the Four Noble Truths, training the whole mind to see the world through the lens of the Four Noble Truths, and to behave accordingly. So then Sāriputta says, ignorance originates from the asavas. So asava is another one of these words that's difficult to translate. In the past, it's been translated as taint, or defilement, or corruption, which are all relatively decent words. Asava can also have the meaning of influence, like a subconscious influence. Influence is actually a very literal translation because the word root here is from the verb savati, which means to flow, which is why asava has sometimes been translated as influx or inflow. But that's actually not terribly useful. Influence is a little bit more accurate. So when the mind is influenced in these unwholesome ways, then it leads to ignorance, and it leads to desire and aversion. It leads to fixation on self-identity. It leads to constant rebirth in the realms of suffering. So ignorance arises from defilement, from corruption of mind, from the asavas. And the monks say, is there another way to describe right view? And Sāriputta says, a disciple of the Noble Ones understands the asavas, their origin, their cessation, and the practice that leads to their cessation. And what are the asavas? He says there are these three asavas: the asava of sensuality, the asava of existence, and the asava of ignorance. So this is kamasava, bhavasava, and avijjasava. And sometimes in the suttas, it's given as a list of four. The fourth one that's included is ditthasava, the asava of views. When there's just a list of three, then the asava of views is understood to be included under avijjasava, the asava of ignorance. So kamasava then is the underlying influence of sensuality. So the mind is influenced to be fixated on sensuality. Bhavasava is the influence or the corruption of existence. So this is directly related to self-identity, of wanting to be something. I want to be. So bhavasava is this underlying tendency, is influence to be fixated on self-existence. And avijjasava is the underlying tendency of ignorance, which it can express itself in quite coarse ways of just wanting to blank out or zone out or fantasize or daydream. But it can also take the form of just not looking at our experience, not looking at our actual experience of the Four Noble Truths. Again, trying to pretend that everything is sunshine and butterflies when that's just not the nature of reality. Trying to ignore the suffering that we're experiencing, trying to pretend that there's nothing wrong with our life, when actually the mind is constantly pervaded with dukkha. So avijjasava, this corrupted influence in the mind, which is constantly inclining us towards ignorance, towards not paying attention to the Four Noble Truths, not paying attention to the way things are. It's kind of head in the sand approach to life that is so pervasive in the world. And so Sāriputta says the asavas arise from ignorance. The asavas cease when ignorance ceases, and the practice that leads to the cessation of the asavas is this Noble Eightfold Path, that is right view, right attitude, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And so then Sāriputta affirms again that one who understands in this way has given up the underlying tendency to greed, aversion, and the concept of self-existence, has given up ignorance and given rise to knowledge and made an end of suffering in this very life. And Sāriputta says when they've done this, they're defined as a disciple of the Noble Ones who has right view, whose view is upright, who has certainty and confidence in the Dhamma, and has arrived at the true Dhamma. So this is what Venerable Sāriputta said. Satisfied, the monks approved of what Venerable Sāriputta had said. That's the end of the discourse. We can respect it with 3 sadhus, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay. So hello to the people joining in online. Hello to Maria, Visas, Rick, Sean, Lydia, Ryan, Kumu, Manal, Chittapala, Kim, Yankee, Vanessa, Brian, Amaranta, Jayanta, Olga, Gregory, John, Meredith, Richard, Bhumika, Anjali, Ninja, Manny, and anyone else who's watching. It's quite a number of people joining in. That's great. And there's a few questions here. Let's have a look. Visa says, what's the difference between the abandonment of self-view of a stream enterer and an arhat? So the sutta doesn't really go into that, but just briefly speaking, a stream enterer recognizes that they are not the specific components of body and mind, but they still have the belief in self-existence. So a stream enterer would know, this body is not me. These thoughts are not me. These emotions are not me. A stream enterer would know this, but a stream enterer would still have the fundamental belief, I exist, I am. They would know I am not this body, but they still think, nonetheless, I am something. Just not this, but I am something. Not this body, not this mind, but I'm something. Don't know what, but it's not this. Whereas an arhat knows that there is no I am to be found anywhere. Nothing whatsoever can be called me or mine. So this is the difference. Prior to becoming an arhat, one still has what's called asmimana. Asmimana means the concept of self-existence, the concept I am, I exist. Whereas an arhat completely eliminates asmimana. They no longer have the concept of I am. They no longer have the concept of self. Ryan says, is death and rebirth also metaphorical for previous lives or selves, self-views, as in when we were 7 years old, verse 14, verse 13, and so forth? Yes. So death and rebirth, technically speaking, happens every single moment. Every moment, the experience we had in the past moment dies, and the conditions that it left gives rise to a new moment, a new birth. So technically, death and rebirth is happening every moment. But this doesn't change the fact that it also applies on the scale of life to life. So death and rebirth happens on both very small scales, so moment to moment, and also large scales, life to life. Visa says, does craving only lead to suffering when accompanied with passion and delight? It always leads to suffering, Visas. Craving leads to suffering. This is one of the most basic teachings of the Buddha. Craving leads to suffering. Immediately. You don't even have to wait. It's already there. Craving is suffering. There's no gap in time. Kumo says, why is the topic of intoxicants only found in the 5 precepts and not listed under the wholesome, unwholesome list or any other list of unwholesome, wholesome deeds? So the topic of intoxicants comes up in many places in the suttas. And it's true that when the Buddha talks about lists of wholesome and unwholesome actions, he doesn't always include intoxicants. But I mean, I kind of feel for the Buddha in that he taught a lot of things at a lot of times, and it'd be kind of a lot to ask him to make every single discourse be an utterly complete list of every single thing he ever said. That would be a lot. So sometimes a list will have 5 out of 10 things. Other times it has the other 5. Sometimes it has the first 7. Sometimes it has the first 3. Sometimes it has them mixed around in different orders. So I take that as just being that the Buddha is speaking about whatever was most relevant to his particular audience. Why is it that intoxicants are mentioned less often? Well, maybe it was just not relevant as often. Or maybe the Buddha wanted to emphasize the more major coarse things. Again, things like killing and stealing and sexual misconduct. These are really, really major things. Whereas if one is working on cultivating clarity of mind and self-restraint, then intoxicants will naturally be something that you avoid. If one is working on cultivating wisdom, then naturally one will avoid intoxicants. If one is reducing desire, then that will also include desire for intoxicants. So to some degree, as one practices Dhamma, then one will naturally see the danger in intoxicants and naturally lose interest in them. Richard says, could the asavas be the causing condition for ignorance and vice versa? That's actually exactly what we see at the end of the sutta. At the end of the sutta, that's exactly what Sāriputta does. So he says, what's the cause of ignorance? The cause of ignorance is the asavas. What's the cause of the asavas? It is ignorance. So these are effectively synonymous. They come together. And in fact, ignorance is one of the asavas. One of the asavas is avidya, ignorance. So we talk about them as though they're two separate things, but they're actually the same thing. Ryan says, would seclusion be a good practice strategy for sense restraint? If so, we would be unable to practice keeping 5 precepts due to seclusion. Why? I think you're automatically keeping them by being in seclusion. If you're in seclusion, there's no one to kill, no one to steal from, no one to cheat on, no one to lie to. The only way you can not follow the 5 precepts in seclusion is if you bring a bunch of alcohol with you, which I don't recommend. So I actually think by practicing seclusion, that's a support to keeping the 5 precepts. I'm not quite sure what you mean, Ryan. Ryan says, I asked because when I was back in the city, it only took me 5 days before my old self kicked into a verbal conflict. Granted, much more tamed than pre-seclusion. Well, you actually see itself for yourself. It was more tamed than before seclusion. So that might indicate that you did make some progress in working with it. That said, this is part of why in monastic life, a lot of monastic life is actually about interacting with other community members. So we spend time in seclusion, but we also spend time in community. And that's because there are some defilements which are very difficult to uproot when we're alone. But when we're in community, it's much easier to see and identify and work with those defilements. So seclusion is good, but in and of itself, it's not sufficient. So some time in seclusion, some time with others, other spiritual practitioners, other Buddhist practitioners. You want both. Both are supportive to the mind. Both are supportive to the training. And actually, I would say if it took you 5 days, so you had 5 days without engaging in verbal conflict, and then when you actually finally did get in verbal conflict after 5 days, it was much more tamed than usual. That sounds again to me like progress. That doesn't sound to me like failure. That sounds like progress. It's like, wow, 5 whole days without wrong speech. That's pretty good. Great. Lisa says, are the types of clinging related? For example, clinging to sensuality will lead to clinging to habits and practices for obtaining sensual experiences. Not necessarily, but they can be. Yeah. And Visa says, aren't out-of-sequence elements standard independent origination, like feeling shows up in Namarupa and as its own link, and consciousness shows up as its link and during contact? Or is that the use of sense consciousness as the link of consciousness referred to the consciousness of the previous moment? So the whole out-of-sequence thing to me actually just indicates that sometime after the passing of the Buddha, there was some effort made to bring about greater consistency within the texts, and that led to some things being rearranged or rewritten in order to create greater consistency. And in some cases, I think that rearranging and rewriting actually obscured the intended meaning. And it's in the standardized definition of dependent origination. This is one case where it becomes clear that in that effort to create consistency, they actually wound up making things more obscure rather than more clear. So I think that's actually what happened here. Because the definitions for each of the sections seems to have been copy-pasted from other suttas, and those definitions made sense in other contexts. But in the context of dependent origination, those definitions don't fit very well. And again, this is especially clear in the first three links or so. So Sankhara, Vijnana, Namarupa, they're defined in terms of things that come up later in the list, which doesn't really make any sense. Unless we take dependent origination as not being a causal sequence, so much as a lump of things that all arise simultaneously. Which is one way I've heard teachers explain it, is that dependent origination is not actually a sequence like first there's this, then there's this, then there's this, then there's this, then there's this, but rather it's like when there's ignorance, then this whole mass of 12 interconnected things all arise at the same time. So that's a way of explaining it, which gets around the whole temporal anomaly issue that we would otherwise have. If we take all the links of dependent origination as arising simultaneously in each moment, then there's no problem with sequencing because there isn't actually a sequencing. It's just a single thing composed of 12 pieces. Then there's no sequencing problem. So that's one way of explaining it, which skirts around what would otherwise be a sequencing problem. Okay, and Ryan says, if stopping perception and mental fabrications at feelings is possible, could you kindly explain on how to incorporate it into a practice leading to the cessation of the asavas, please? Stopping perceptions and mental fabrications at feelings is possible. Stopping perception and stopping mental fabrications in the sense of not engaging in creation of mental constructs. You can do that anytime. So usually the reason why teachers fixate on feelings is because this is one place where craving is very obvious. A pleasant feeling arises and we have craving for pleasant feeling. Painful feeling arises and we have hatred towards painful feeling. Neutral feeling arises and we're not paying any attention because we don't care. So you can very clearly see the three tendencies of mind, the tendencies of desire, aversion, and ignorance. You can clearly see them in relation to the three kinds of feeling, the three feeling tones. So this is the main reason why teachers tend to fixate on feeling in particular, is that it's a very clear and obvious way to observe the three root defilements. So then dropping desire for pleasant sensation, dropping aversion towards painful sensation, and cultivating clear awareness of neutral sensation is a way of directly counteracting the three root defilements, and therefore progressing towards the elimination of the asavas. Visa says, if all craving leads to suffering, what's the significance of including its accompaniment with passion and delight in the second noble truth? So I think it's more pointing out to the fact that, again, delight and passion reinforce craving and therefore are a basis of suffering. Because as I mentioned earlier, worldly people will often say like, oh, delighting in things is great because it makes you happy. Being passionate about something is great because it gives your life fervor, it gives vitality to your life. So they talk about delight and passion as though they're good things. But here the Buddha is saying that delight and passion are always mixed up with craving, which is itself the cause of suffering. So delight and passion are things which increase our suffering, not our happiness. So I think that's why it's called out specifically. It's pointing out that these two things, which worldly people think are good, are actually ultimately causes of misery and torment. And Visa says, is there a sutta you'd recommend to get a more faithful rendering of dependent origination? So dependent origination is one of these incredibly complex topics, which is hotly debated and has a million different interpretations. And if you read through the suttas, you'll find it's actually presented in different ways in different suttas. Of course, the majority are found in the Nidana Samyutta and the Samyutta Nikaya. So there's many, many discourses on dependent origination there. Really, if you want to understand dependent origination, you just need to read all the suttas, cover to cover, a few times. You can read some secondary sources on the topic if you like. The best one I found is Ajahn Buddhadasa's book that gives a pretty good description of Paticca Samuppada. Yeah, and if you read the opinions of different teachers, you'll realize how many different opinions there are on the matter. Everyone seems to have their own interpretation of Paticca Samuppada. And honestly, you only ever really understand it when you attain stream entry. This also is made clear in the suttas. So up until then, well, the important thing is extracting the principle. So the principle of Paticca Samuppada is that everything has causal relation to each other. So nothing is independent from everything else, but rather everything is part of a causal nexus. And the basis of that causal nexus for unawakened beings is avijja, it's ignorance. It's not knowing the Four Noble Truths. And then with ignorance of the Four Noble Truths as the causal basis, then all of our experience of suffering and samsara arises from that. So that's the simple thing to point to, rather than getting hung up in the details. It's catching the overall thrust of what the Buddha is talking about here. That's the last question, so I think we'll go ahead and conclude the session at this time with 3 more sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you all next time.